two video maybe. Sergio?
Yeah, Sergio.
Chapato, Arenas?
Yeah.
It's okay. Chapato.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The title of the presentation is Exploring the Current Controversial Metabolic Approach to Treatise of Marx and Engels works.
Yeah. Here is the.
Okay. It's yours.
Who can I move? Okay. You gotta take your time. Okay, hello dear colleagues. I am Sergio Chaparro-Arenas, a Latin American philosopher who currently is pursuing a PhD here in Budapest, in ELTE. It's a real pleasure to be in front of the members of Hungarian and Western European community of philosophers. My presentation is this: exploring the current controversy of metabolic approach of the civilization crisis in Marx and Engels' work. Okay, the purpose is basically a public communication of my doctoral research and in its initial steps. My current supervisor in this PhD path is Dr. László, the head of the Institute of Philosophy, and I would like to say very thanks to the commenter, Dr. László Ropolyi, that made me some comments about this topic. Okay, what is the problem? In the social science and the history of philosophy of 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, there is some controversial views that I strongly disagree, who say, for example, that there's not at all a unified theory of prices in Marx and Engels, just theory or claims about cyclical and plural prices that capitalist mode of production made. Other famous claim is that if there is some crisis theory, is just a reductionist view about economics or even a purely political struggle. Marx and Engels didn't capture the current phenomena of environmental crisis, for example. And the third one, and this is a big challenging for doing hermeneutics, is try to differentiate Marx and Engels in different stages of their lives. I mean, the young Marx, intermediate Marx, or late Marx. So the problem is these three views that me and other scholars across the world try to face in a certain way. Okay, what is the method that I would like to do? First one, there is a huge literature of philosophy of social science to study currently controversies. There is a controversy, a revival of this controversy related with natural science and ecology. Yeah? So I will use some of my master studies in science and technology studies, or STS. Also, I would like to use hermeneutics, especially the 4 books of Marx Capital. I was checking, for example, the last one, theories or surplus value, and so keep articles about Marx and Engels' complete works. And the idea here is like a mix, the history of science and social history, basically. And the last one, the key debates in political philosophy related mainly on criticism of modernity and catastrophes, and Marx and theory of crisis. Okay, my indagations are these two. The first one is the general, that it claims how can Marx and Engels' metabolic framework be renovated to theorize the current civilization crisis of capitalism. And here is K, or the new literature shows how Marx and Engels, these post-classical German philosophers and also social scientists, deal with chemistry, agronomy, geology, and natural science. How this literature influenced their view about the crisis of capitalist civilization. So this is one of my key questions. The other one is focused or target the controversy with these two scholars of this global debate in America and Europe and Asia mainly. Of course, in Africa too, is Kohei Saito, is a Japanese philosopher who is making the new metabolic reading of Marx and Engels. How their critical political economy is close connected to the natural science. And here we have the American sociologist and also economist John Bellamy Foster, that since 90s has produced how Marx and Engels get a strong connection with Darwin, with ancient philosophy too, Epicurus, and all these authors of natural philosophy. Okay, the hypothesis that in this controversy that we'd like to discuss is this one, that one of the best ways to solve the current contradiction between approaches who focuses more in economics or those new approaches that try to take into account global warming and all this stuff is the metabolic hypothesis. How to think about the crisis of current civilization in metabolic terms. It means a reciprocal or causal relations between society and nature. Nature itself is objective power, and between society and its social classes. This could be a way to avoid in materialist tradition in sciences and philosophy certain reductionism and certain mainstream views that try to say like determinative of capital, that there is cycles of crisis and only the agency of working class can save the humankind. No, here the idea is that each civilization gets historical limits, and we must think in contemporary philosophy concepts such as definitive of capital, catastrophes, and all these issues. One provisional formulation of the hypothesis could be this one. There exists with full theoretical credentials a theory of civilization crisis in Marx and Engels' complete work based on a metabolic perspective. This theory could unify economic, political, environmental, and cultural dimensions of the current civilization of capital and labor and its historic finitude. What is the novelty about this? Because one possible counter-argument says like, okay, but since the end of 19th century, Marx, Engels, and also other Marxists from the 20th century have predicted the collapse of capitalism. And this catastrophic hypothesis, what is the novelty about this one? Okay, the novelty is basically since the collapse of Soviet Union, or here the Popular Republic of Hungary, new freedom of research has arrived in academy, and there is a rich literature of eco-Marxists that keeping studies the manuscripts of these two philosophers and social scientists. One of them, and I say this, Kohei Saito, and the other one is Foster. The we can say the same claim that Marx said about Hegel, that they aren't dead dogs or dead bodies. They still saying things to us, and the literature, the current literature shows us. The second one, in the public relevance of philosophy, we can check some reports of scientists. For example, DOSZ Forum of World Economical Forum about the poly-crisis, the 9 planetary boundaries that Switzerland Academy done, and the United Nations panel related with climate change warming. There is a huge concern in scientists about what is the current crisis, what is going on with the current civilization, and we think that philosophy can use the theoretical tools for understanding this issue. There is debates about catastrophes, modern civilization, finiteness, basically. So the challenging here is not conceive the political philosophy as independent field, but instead of that, reconnect again with philosophy of science, that in ELTE is very strong, and also the natural science. Okay, the current metabolics reading, there are several. I'm just gonna focus in these two authors, Foster and Civilizatory, but we can check some limits, because the idea is not make an apologetic reading about these two authors and just it. No, the idea is that we can be involved in that controversy and try to produce some advancements. One first limit about the new metabolic reading is this. The lack of an historical and systematic crisis theory of Marx and Engels by using Marxist literature, philosophy of social science. There is no careful analysis of these things. So this is a kind of empty point that could be filled in certain way. The second one, even when these authors try to study the mega-2 or the discovery of new manuscripts of Marx and Engels, and try to study how they make some notes of Germans and European natural scientists, they going to make a theory of crisis involved in that thing. For example, John Bellamy Foster tried to speak us about Earth system crisis, catastrophic capitalism, with empirical evidence, the financial crisis, global warming, etc. But there is no direct involvement in the debate of a crisis, theory of crisis. And in the case of Kohei Saito, he defends a very problematic view about Marx and Engels. His claim is that, for example, capital try to manage the current catastrophes such as Gaza or COVID pandemic in order to rebuild the machinery, manage better, and that his view is purely cyclical. There's no a careful debate about the notion of end of capitalism in certain way. Okay, and the third problematic view is that this contemporary reading of Marx and Engels try to focus on how they were related with Darwin and his followers, but they tried to cut it or abandon the core, in Lakatos' way, the core of Marx and Engels' collective agency. I mean, concepts as proletariat dictatorship, transition, independence workers' political party, class struggle, permanent revolution. That there are key concepts that Marx and Engels in certain way defend during their entire life. So the challenge is how we can assemble objective and subjective factors in a metabolic way without cut any aspects of them. If you want to check it more, this is the reference. There is a, as you can see, the debate is not only in the 90s, it's still alive in the 21st century. And in this presentation, I just want to focus that it gets a public relevance, not only in academic philosophy, but also in scientific communities and also in social and political movements across the world. Thank you, Cousin.
Ropolyi who referred your presentation.
Okay, I read your expert review. The text in question is an outline of 10 doctoral dissertation. Essentially, it contains various formulations of a basic idea, supported by a few bibliographical references to provide context. The idea, if I understand correctly, is that Marx and Engels' critique of capitalism applied to the entire historical system of capitalism and does not narrowly further its cyclically recurring crisis. This does not seem to be particularly original or unusual interpretation of the renewed author's ideas, but it can be useful to examine and articulate them from time to time, since it's a rather conventional trend in one way or another to relatives that regulationary aspiration. In this sense, the work of this kind can always be interesting and useful. An analysis of the crisis of civilization that focus on the metabolism between society and natural is still truly relevant today and indeed holds outstanding significance. I believe it is worth addressing. And after that, your expert suggests some critical points. I read it.
Yeah, of course.
For example, it's worth clarifying the method of analysis. The current version follows the weather and ad hoc approach. It would be important, for example, to clearly present and critically interpret the basic concept, use metabolic perspective, crisis, capitalism, etc. Capitalism, for example, has produced and continues to produce quite a lot of versions throughout history, and which Marx and his followers are talking about is not trivial, but it can be made clear. An analysis of interpretation of the crisis would be of fundamental importance. It's very important alongside science, and in some cases, instead of it, to clarify the technology, the society-technology relationship following Schwartz's model by taking into account critical theories of the philosophy of technology and the approach of science and technology studies. Schwartz, other writing as well as the Institute of Philosophy at the University of Rotterdam and related initiatives are suitable for developing a broader perspective. It's worth familiarizing oneself with them. Much has been written about the Marxist conception of nature, most of it relevant. Also typical is the existent literature of Engels' conception of the dialectics of nature and György's critique of it. In addition to the those mentioned in the text, there are some other important authors, include Marx himself, John Kapuja, etc. And in Hungary, Bence Marozsák has substantially addressed issues concerning Marx's contribution to ecology. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. A couple of hours before. Yeah.
Late, I think.
Yeah, but it was very useful.
Would you like to reflect?
Yeah, just 2 comments. The first one, the commenter mentioned that a Hungarian scholar that is very interested in this topic. And I guess the challenging here in Hungary is, for example, the archive project and how György analyze also the metabolism. Politika FiTO gets a famous paper published in 2023 related with this topic. So there is a path to come back to not only the story of philosophy, because sometimes that I disagree, that is the level of novelty or originality about these things. I guess the idea is not making an analogy like scholastics reread Aristotle again. No, here is not a topic of history of philosophy. Here the topic is Marx and Engels and the current diagnosis of sciences and the state of work of 19th century natural science, of course. So I guess the novelty is basically these links. Not try to defend a dogmatic view of a collapse of capitalism.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.